We've got Emma Moore here from the Office of the Public Advocate, independent third person. So these are the ITPs. If you're not familiar with them, you would have heard that acronym numerous times today. So Emma's going to tell you all about what ITPs are and how they fit into this part of the system.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me, everybody. I know after lunch is a massive ask, thank you, and I do present after lunch all of the time, so I very much appreciate your attention. I'm very grateful for it. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land before I continue, because that's part of our protocol at OPA. So I'm going to talk about OPA today briefly, so if you've got any questions about advocacy, which people have raised with me during the debate, please ask me at the end, and I'm mainly going to focus on the independent third person program, which I manage. Okay, so this is in a nutshell is what the independent third person program is. So we run a 24/7 statewide volunteer service which attends police interviews. This is on request from Victoria Police, and we attend those for alleged offenders, witnesses and victims who police believe have a form of cognitive impairment or mental illness. The believe part here is incredibly important, so we don't need a diagnosis to attend. All I want the police to do is to ring the number if they suspect something's wrong. So if they're meeting with someone, they might think they're drug affected, and then a few hours later it becomes apparent that it's more of an ongoing issue. They're required to call an ITP, even if they have no information about that person's medical history. We also have the Corrections Independent Support Officer Program. Now I know this is an ABI forum, but we do this for intellectually disabled prisoners only, and the reason for that is that it's a funding issue. We don't have enough money to do everybody in a prison, but we go to all Victorian prisons with specially trained ITPs, and they support prisoners during governor's hearings. So that's if they've breach of prisons regulations. So something like smoking now, smoking's outlawed in all prisons. So anyone who's got an intellectual disability, they're required to have a CISO present if they want one. And they support them through those hearings. The roles are very similar. Okay, so the ITP program started, it's over 25 years old now. And Lisa Losman did a research paper called Finding the Way, the Criminal Justice System and the Person with an Intellectual Disability. So these are the results of the research. I'll start going through them. So people with intellectual disability, this includes other forms of cognitive impairment as well, they're more likely to be arrested, they're more likely to be charged, they're more often refused bail without a supervision condition, they're convicted more frequently, and they're sentenced to jail more frequently. So Corrections was in our office last week, and we were having a chat about the fact that people are managing to make their way to police interviews and to prisons without ever being diagnosed and without ever seeing a support worker, which is hugely problematic because it shouldn't be that it's getting picked up and then trying to tackle it at the corrections end is incredibly hard, because trying to get DHS or DHHS at the moment to come and attend a prison is very difficult, because their priority is people in the community, because they've got, demands on their own service as well, and if someone's supported in accommodation, if it's prison or not, they're going to drop to the bottom of the list to go and get diagnosed. They also receive longer sentences. So if you've got an intellectual disability, you're getting the rough end of the deal, and shorter parole periods. Okay, so as a result of this research back in '87, is that people with an intellectual disability need a bit more support in police interviews to hopefully prevent this outcome from occurring. So police manual guidelines were drawn up as a result of this, and the ITP program was born. So this comes underneath. Police are required to have a support person at an interview under legislation if someone's under 18. So if that person has a disability, we go to those interviews. If they don't, there's another program called WIREP that does that. But there is no legislative requirement for the ITP program. It's a policy program only. But has anyone heard of the VPMs, the Victoria Police Manual? Yep. And does everyone know how they operate? So the VPMs are internal policy guideline for police. So as you can appreciate, there's a significant amount of legislation attached to policing, and you can't know the answer to everything. So the police can literally look up mental impairment or cognitive impairment in their manual, and then they get instructions, and so we come underneath that instead. It's a very useful tool because all police members refer to it, and it just comes up on their intranet and they just go and click through. So that's the legal requirement I was talking about. Okay, so this was drawn up a little while ago, so mental disorder is not a term we necessarily use anymore, but that's what's still in the VPMs. And it is that an independent third person is to be present at the interview of any person with an impaired mental state or capacity who is fit to be interviewed. This means intellectual disability. This includes autism, acquired brain injury, dementia, and any form of mental illness. It doesn't include alcohol or drug-affected people because that is that's an impairment that goes away. So that's something that the police require to let that person, for want of a better term, dry out, and they interview them later. That doesn't require an ITP, and it's far too dangerous for police members to interview people while they're under the influence. Okay, so there's a few ways that police can identify the person may require the presence of an ITP. So they can speak to the person directly and go, look, there's something wrong. There's also LEAP, which LEAP stands for the Law Enforcement Assistance Program. That's the data program police use, so that's where all their information comes in and out of. And they can attach a flag. So you guys can do this as well. So I think that's what there's a police presenter on after me, Stephen Pope, and he'll be talking about how you can attach a warning flag to a person. That's not a bad thing because that means it enacts a ITP to attend your interviews. It also means that the police should take caution when they're dealing with your client or someone like that, and also can give them tips on how to communicate with that person to get the best outcome for everyone involved. So when they're marked on LEAP as having an ITP before, the police members can see that and then they'll call an ITP again. So ITPs can be us, so we have a train program, but the police can also invite a relative or a close friend to perform that function. We prefer that doesn't happen, simply because it can go either way. Like, relatives can be incredibly helpful, particularly for people who are non-verbal, because we're talking about a really wide range of impairments. But sometimes, in our experience, it'll be often people have carers. They may not necessarily have close friends or family, and they don't necessarily help during the interview process. So the police will invite us instead, and they prefer to use us when they can access us. For example, a DHS carer that we know of took someone to a police station and they wanted to report a sexual assault. And she said that never happened because she worked with the staff member. So it's preferable to have an independent person to support that person at interview, and particularly as well because some people, while they mean well, like a parent might be like, you just did it, you tell them that you did it. And anyone who knows anyone with a disability knows that even if they didn't do it, they're highly likely to then walk into that room and say, I did it, so it's a little bit awkward. So we do prefer the trained ITPs to attend, and the police call us very often, as you'll see on the next few slides. So these are the key roles and responsibilities of the ITP. So the job of the ITP is to facilitate communication. So we assist with understanding the questions asked. We ask particularly to understand the rights and cautions. People shouldn't be interviewed unless they know their rights. So if someone doesn't understand their rights, they shouldn't be interviewed. And they're very complicated. So for someone who has an ID or a cognitive impairment, you have the right to contact or attempt to contact a family, friend or relative is actually a very long way of saying you can make a phone call. And so people may not necessarily understand that, particularly when you're in a highly stressful situation, which is what a police station is. And then we provide general support through the investigation process. Okay, so this is really important because even though I'm from the Office of the Public Advocate, we do advocate for people with a disability or a mental illness. We don't make decisions on behalf of the person. So we don't sit there and say, you shouldn't make a comment. Unfortunately, it's for a specific reason. It's because people have the right to interact as somebody else would. So human rights are to, assist someone in reaching the rights of other people. And so with a cognitive impairment, we're there to make sure that they won't be treated any differently to someone who has full cognitive reasoning. So this means making sure they understand their rights, how to facilitate access to undertaking those rights, like contacting a legal practitioner or a family friend or member, but we don't tell them what to do. This is really important because it is something that means that we stay independent, both of the police and the person, and notwithstanding working in the criminal justice system, unfortunately, not everybody makes good decisions, and that includes people with a disability, and they do need to be interviewed by Victoria Police. So we're not professional support workers, we're not experts in disability or mental health, and we're not interpreters, so they're really key things. The The role of the ITP is we meet the police prior to the interview. So you rock into the station, you tell them you're there. You meet with the person prior to the interview. So Victoria Police are required to give us time alone with the client. If it's too dangerous, we don't do that, but that's very rare. If it's something like a homicide, it's very unlikely that the ITP can meet with that person in private, but it is something that we do the majority of the time. So you meet with the person. Essentially what you do is you go over the caution of rights. This is for alleged offenders. And you talk to that person about them. What we do is ask them to repeat back in their own words what they are, and I guess make a bit of an assessment about whether or not they fully understand what the rights are. Then we provide feedback to the police about the person's communication skills and level of comprehension. One of the things that we do as well is we ask people to tell us the time. That's really indicative of if people do have higher cognitive reasoning, because the police ask it during an interview as well. So if someone can't tell the time, you already know something's probably a little bit wrong. Either the schooling's a bit out, or the person does have a cognitive impairment. We provide assistance with the fingerprinting caution, which is incredibly badly worded. It's very long and very complicated. We attend and support the client while fingerprints are taken. We attend bail hearings before bail justices. Does everyone know what a bail justice is, by the way? Okay, so a bail justice is a volunteer. A large amount of the criminal justice system does run on volunteers. And instead of a magistrate, they perform that function after hours if the police would like to release someone, they'd like to remand someone. And if the bail just releases them on bail, they have the same function as a magistrate where they can attach conditions, and then that person's expected to report to the court a bit later. That's an incredibly difficult role, and it's run by the Honorary Justice Office. Then the ITP completes a report about all the things they've done at the interview, and they send it to the OPA office. Now, what we ask for in those reports isn't necessarily what the content of the interview is. It's more about how we did our job. So how did we facilitate communication? Is there any referrals that need to be made? Things like that. So we're not... while criminal justice system has fascinating things in it, I don't need the details of what's occurred during the interview. Okay, so the job of the police is to allow the time for the ITP to arrive, allow a private consultation with the ITP, ensure that the police then do this as well on tape, so that's their next job. The interviewee then has to explain their rights in their own words. It's the job of the police to ask questions that can be understood, so it's not the fault of the client if they don't understand. It means the question needs to be asked so that person can communicate back and take care to verify facts. So the ITP's job during the interview is typically what our standard line is can you rephrase that and can you check for understanding? So, because we can't tell the police what questions to ask, but we can certainly tell if someone doesn't understand and if maybe they need to say it a bit differently so that that person can answer the question appropriately. There's a wonderful system called the Forensic Medical Officer System. This is a statewide system run by the Victorian Institute for Forensic Medicine. So an FMO is a service run by these guys, and what they do is they assess fitness for interview. So as you can appreciate, policing is a 24/7 job. They do come into contact with people who are very unwell at times, and the Forensic Medical Officer's job is to make an assessment about whether or not that person is fit to undertake a police interview in terms of wellness and health. So this is a really good option. So for police, if the ITP arrives, they'll say, look, have you spoken to an FMO? Because I think you probably need to, because I honestly think there's problems here and you shouldn't interview. So there's the option there as well for the police and ITP to make recommendations to call an FMO. We currently have 280 active ITPs throughout Victoria. We attended every single police station in Victoria on request, and any other place where police are conducting an interview. So we're invited to the interview. So for example, for sexual assault victims, they can often take place in the victim's home, and so the ITP will attend the home with the police member and support them through the interview. We also do a fair amount of interviews in mental health hospitals. Okay, so last financial year we did just under 2,900 interviews. So this is the breakdown of the type of interviews we attend. So this has changed from the year before. So it used to be 90% alleged offenders, now it's 84%, and then victims and witnesses make up the remainder. So we do This year we're doing a really large amount of victim interviews. They're run by a specific unit at Victoria Police. They're called the Sexual Offences and Child Investigation Team. They undertake specifically VAERS with people who have a disability and have been sexually assaulted. That includes ABI, so this is all types of disability. A VAER, for all intents and purposes, replaces a court hearing, so that person doesn't have to be cross-examined on the stand. So they're very different types of interviews, and they're undertaken by specific police members. Okay, this is just offender type and the type of interviews we attend, the number in a nice graph, if anyone's visual. And these are the types of things that we attend. So this is the criminal justice system, so generally not very pleasant. 14 homicides last year, 751 physical assaults, 210 rapes, 316 sexual assaults. They are different. It depends on how you categorise them as to what people get charged with. Property damage, theft, burglary, there's forced marriage, there's things like that that the ITPs attend. So these are volunteers attending some really, really interesting interviews that often, don't have good outcomes for people. So it can be quite difficult to attend some of these. And here's the breakdown of disability that we know of. Now, we ask our ITPs not to tell us if they don't know. If the person happily gives the information or someone has the information, then we record it, but we don't need to know because we just need to know that we've been there. So as you can see, ABI on here, that's actually quite high. So we do, that made up for about, so that's 437 out of 2,900, so maybe just under, 20%. So that's fairly high for ABI. We're and then unknown down here, that's a really high proportion as well. So that's 719. So we don't actually know the disability, we just know something's wrong, and we attend those interviews. So that's kind of how that works. So I'm willing to bet there's quite a number of people who have an ABI in that category. But people often don't want to, particularly if you've never met them, they don't want to necessarily disclose their disability in that instance if they know about it. And often a lot of people you meet with generally aren't aware that they do have some kind of impairment. So I fly through my presentations. That's basically the program in a nutshell. It's a really interesting program. So I'm really proud of all our volunteers. They're all fantastic. They do fantastic work. But managing a statewide program is incredibly complex. So so if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask them for me now, and I'll remember things about the program and talk at the same time. Yep.
How do you become an ITP, and what are the prerequisites and expectations and all that sort of stuff?
Thank you. Excellent question. I was in Mildura yesterday doing an info session, so please forgive me because I did a very long day yesterday. In regards to the ITPs, we do request that people have some experience with disability or customer service. It's very, with volunteering, as you can appreciate, because it's not paid, recruitment's a very different thing to that of a paid role. So we accept applications, we review those applications. Depending on the area, we don't always take people because if we're at capacity, we'll just say, look, we'll come back to you. But we generally try to interview everybody that expresses an interest. And then at that interview stage, you can kind of work out if we have specific competencies, and during the interview process we work out if they can meet those competencies, and then we say no if they can't, and if they can, we police check them, working with children check them, and then they come to induction. Then there's a practice and assessment where we get people with a disability to come in, and they have to role play the interview scenario. We get Victoria Police to come down, they're on camera, and we assess their performance, and if people don't meet requirements for that as well, they don't get to be ITPs. So this is what we call point-in volunteering. It's professionalised volunteering. So while it's not as stringent necessarily as professional employment, everyone has to have the competency to perform the role. And what I was saying yesterday is because I have a student at the moment. She said, does everyone have to have university degrees? And I was like, no, because we've got a large amount of female volunteers who never went to university or worked because it's a generational thing. So you can't go, well, we have to have all these requirements because we're not paying people. And it's some people just have a real gift with working with people with a disability and performing particular roles. So, and you don't want to rule those people out by saying you have to have all of these requirements. So, we have a really varied volunteer pool. We've got the most varied volunteer pool at OPA because we're 24/7. So that means that it actually fits in really well with a lot of people's working lives, because I volunteered a lot at university, and it was really hard to find things because a lot of it was geared 9 to 5, and so if you work you can't volunteer. So we have about 30% that are from 18, you have to be 18 years old, I'm sorry, that is a requirement, I forgot about that, 18 to 40, and then another 30% that are 40 to 60, and then 60 plus is another 30%. So, and we also have Koori people who volunteer, and people from a wide variety of cultural backgrounds, including Afghanistan and India and places like that. So I'm really proud of that. I think it's a really, I'm really proud of that recruitment process and getting those people in.
How confident do ITPs feel in stopping the interview with the police if they believe that the person doesn't understand the question?
Yeah, we train for that, so they're supposed to do that. So most of the training is honestly around how do you say no to someone, and particularly because an exercise that we run with people that I was going to do today is that I ask everyone to stand up during training, and everyone does it, and they all stare out the window because I've asked them to. And because I'm in charge of the room, because I'm the authority figure, and it's very difficult to say no to someone. Like if you've been arrested and chucked in the back of a paddy van, and then you're at a police station, people with disability are more compliant than the general population anyway. So the training specifically around that, stopping, because as well we train for people's changes during the interview. So what someone's like at the start of the interview isn't necessarily what they're like halfway through or the end. So at any point in time, the ITP is supposed to say, can I have a chat to you for a minute? And, I think this person's deteriorating. And that does happen because the ITPs will ring me and say, and it comes in on the report, person started drooling, or they've seriously changed during the interview and they've had to stop it.
My question just follows on from that. How long generally is the police interview process? And as we know, a lot of people with ABI fatigue and would be overwhelmed. And is there an allowance for breaking it into parts, or, what happens when someone can't keep it up?
So it depends on the type of interview. So not in terms of that you can have breaks in all of the interviews, and that's very common. So you'll see the break, pause, because all these interviews are video recorded as well. So that's a change in technology. So it's very rare to have written statements now. Like that person will be on tape and they get a copy to take home, so they'll see how that interview went, and so will anyone else they care to show it to. The exception is sexual assault victims. So sometimes what will happen is that because they're intended to replace a court hearing, they can run over multiple days. So because that person is fatigued or need a break and they have to come back the next day. With alleged offender interviews, it depends on the circumstance. They can run for a very long time. We're not in a position to dictate the length of those interviews, but we do ask if people deteriorate, they're asked to have a break, see if they recover, and if they don't, to stop the interview. But bearing in mind that some of these are homicides and other things, and that people want to continue questioning, the record's 17 hours with breaks, and the shortest is 15 minutes.
Apologies if I've missed you saying this. Do they have ITPs in the court system?
No, they don't. So that's something everyone's very interested in. So there is a thing called Court Network, which is also volunteers who come and support people through the court process. And there's also in some regional areas, Wangaratta and I want to say Benalla, there's a thing called, I think, Disability Advocacy Service, and they support people at court, and that's mainly ITPs who've gone, I want to go support these people at court, and made a volunteer group to do that. Yeah.
So what percentage do you think is missed where the police don't contact you guys?
It would still be there. We also sometimes, we might not always be able to get to every interview as well, depending on what time it is. One particularly fabulous day, 10 ITPs were called for the same at each surrounding station. So it was something like 10 in Nunawading, 10 in Box Hill, 10 somewhere else, all at the same time, and we didn't have capacity to fill that, so we had to organise a way around it. I think not all the time we get called, but I think there's a large amount of support people at Victoria Police interviews. It's just how appropriate they are. And I do think that Victoria has the strongest policing network for people with disability and mental illness. If you've got a mental illness, you would like to be in Victoria, generally, for services and for the policing of those people. But yeah, there's no doubt things get missed, as with everything.
Just wondering what the decision process. What the decision process is for a forensic medical officer to come in and actually do a fitness exam.
Yeah, so you could call a 24/7 number. We all have call centres, so they call the call centre. And depending on how the person presents and where the FMO is, so it's a statewide service. I cannot reiterate that enough. So in metro areas, it's a very different scenario to that of Warrnambool. So they will assess them in person if the need is there, and if not, they'll assess them over the phone. So they'll ask some questions and then say yes or no. So it depends on their capacity, but they are usually very responsive. I haven't heard of people not being able to get onto an FMO, but they may not attend in person. And if they do attend in person, there might be a bit of a delay.
Thanks, Emma.
No worries.
Yeah, I'm just interested, I guess I'm wondering about whether you see much differentiation between how the program's used across different stations, across metropolitan Melbourne and regionally, and whether that's to do with the culture in that particular station and whether they use the program, or whether, and the project I'm working on, we also think that ABI, or we sometimes see that ABI is an indicator of broader other sort of social disadvantage and complex needs, and whether that plays out through how the program's rolled out.
Yeah, so let me just say, Bridget is also in receipt of a grant from the Office of the Public Advocate, like Glenn Kelly. So I met with Bridget the other week. So in terms of the difference between who calls us and who doesn't, so Mildura yesterday, so the reason why we need ITPs in Mildura is because they call us all the time. So there's a culture in Mildura. They won the regional award for policing services for people with a disability from the Public Advocate because they call all the time. Like any single time they suspect, they're on the phone. So there's certainly a difference in culture in particular areas, and a lot of that it will depend on the region, and because we are a really old program, we're 25 years old, a lot of it can be history, and we also, because call centres are relatively new for us in the program's history, so before in the past we used to print out lists and give it to the station and they'd pick particular volunteers, and sometimes they keep calling that volunteer even if they weren't with us anymore. So yeah, a little bit tricky, but yeah, there's certainly a difference. So Mildura is a really high performer. Bendigo is another one that calls us a lot, but certainly I think Victoria Police has done a fantastic job of doing the mental illness stuff, but I think what's happened is disability things need to be worked on because they're less prominent in terms of policing people with a disability, and that's what I think's happened when other areas don't call us as much. So the other thing I was going to talk about today was advocacy. So because we have a telephone advice service, it's also 24/7. So that number, which is here, which is 1300 309 337. That if you guys needed assistance at all in terms of if you think someone should have had an ITP and didn't, we also have, I'm not sure how many people with an ABI in supported accommodation, particularly SRSs. We have a number of volunteer programs. We have 1,000 volunteers across OPA. So we have a community visitors program, and so if you suspect there's issues with where that person's accommodation, we can send another lot of volunteers to go and check that facility, a report, and make sure that person's okay, and you can make a referral through that number. And you can also inquire about guardianship, which is our largest legislated function. And other things like that. So the TAS advice line's really nifty because they'll also just refer you to people who might be able to help you if you have a specific query. So you can definitely do that. Yes?
I just wondered actually how will it always be recorded in the police records that someone had an ITP?
Yeah, usually.
And so if you're getting, say, a self-report of a criminal history or something, it might not necessarily come up in your interview that they were somebody that required that.
What do you mean? Sorry, can you just expand on that a little bit and I'll answer? Yep.
I guess just wondering about if you were identifying someone who had a criminal history and whether or not they may have slipped through the cracks.
Yep.
Or and would it usually be on the police?
Oh, okay. So you're talking about a client who might have had a criminal history and you're not aware of it? Is that the circumstance? Yeah. Okay. So my recommendation is so in terms of the legal warning flag, which Stephen Pope will be talking about, is that if you have a client, because we're talking about victims as well, so it's not just if they're coming into contact with the criminal justice system as an offender, it is you think this person might be at risk of, interacting with the police more frequently than other members of the public. So it is just giving them that advice that this is the things you could possibly do with that person, this person, this is who you can contact, things like that. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's really something to bear in mind because people overwhelmingly are not only offenders, they're victims as well. I would question though, because how does it work for you guys in terms of getting information about your client?
Well, as neuropsychs, normally self-report, and then we'll try to get collateral history from family member or referral, basically anywhere we can think of.
Yeah, bearing in mind with some people their offence may be, one of the actors that we use for our role plays is someone who heard voices in his head. He was schizophrenic, and so he actually, I think he killed someone in a car accident. He crashed straight into them, and he developed an ABI because of that. So he's now got schizophrenia and ABI, but he's never offended again. So in some cases, the offending's a one-off, so it's a bit tricky in terms of, but what we're, I guess, and I'll let the police talk about the warning flag, but our job is to respond to police requests for support. But I can't reiterate enough, if you've got the capacity to communicate and let people know what's going on, it's incredibly helpful because, and for my volunteers as well, they're walking into a situation that can turn incredibly volatile. They're very good at talking people down, but you're walking in without any knowledge of this person at one of the worst moments in their life. So it is, it's incredibly tricky. So, I would encourage communication where possible between people if it's appropriate.
Yeah, I work for Disability Justice in Fitzroy, and I was just wondering whether it's also possible for us to contact the FMO, because sometimes the police...
It's a police program.
Okay, because sometimes the police call me and advise me that they want to interview one of my clients.
Yep.
And I think, not sure whether that's the best idea now because he's really unfit.
Yep. Yeah, so you can say to the police member, look, if you'd like to call an FMO, that's my recommendation to see if he's fit for interview at this point in time, because obviously sometimes, depending on people's illness, they can be well enough to interview at a certain point and maybe not so well. So if they do need a medical assessment, you can certainly, say to the member if they've rung you saying, look, do you want to make sure that he's fit to be interviewed, contact an FMO. The average police career is 7 years, so there can be a lot of education process from ITPs and as well as saying, do you know you have this option? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think that might be it.
Good on you.
Thanks very much, guys. Normally I'm a bit more jaunty, but thank you for having me. And if you've got any questions, I'll be in afternoon too, so please come.